I still remember the exact sentence that ended my career. It was a Thursday. Gray skies, cold coffee, another morning of pretending everything was fine. I'd just finished leading a presentation that could have landed us a multi-million-dollar client. Everyone clapped. Everyone, except my boss, Mark. He sat there in his custom Italian suit, clicking his pen like he was waiting for me to make one last mistake. When the meeting ended, he gestured for me to stay behind. "Close the door, Claire." I did. He leaned back, sighed like a man burdened by other people's feelings, and said the words that would replay in my mind for months. "You're too emotional to lead." It makes clients uncomfortable. At first, I laughed. I actually thought he was joking. But he wasn't. He slid a pink envelope across the table. Neat, thin, final. "We're going in a different direction." Just like that. No warning. No gratitude. Just too emotional. It wasn't just about losing the job. It was about what it represented. I'd spent 7 years at Dovell & Crane. 7 years of late nights, silent weekends, half-eaten takeout in the office kitchen. I'd stayed when others left. I'd built relationships with clients Mark could barely remember the names of. But the day I cried, just once, during a tough meeting about layoffs, everything I'd done became invisible. He didn't fire me for poor performance. He fired me for being human. When I stepped outside, the sky had opened up, rain falling like punctuation marks. I didn't even run for cover. I just stood there, pink envelope in hand, watching the city move around me as if nothing had changed. That's the thing about losing something you gave your whole heart to. The world doesn't notice. It keeps spinning. Traffic keeps honking, people keep scrolling, but inside you, everything stops. That night, I sat on my couch with a blanket and an empty mug staring at the walls. Every time I blinked, I saw Mark's face. Every time I tried to sleep, I heard his voice, calm, condescending, rehearsed. "You're too emotional to be respected. Too emotional to be promoted. Too emotional to be trusted." He turned my strength into a flaw. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my old sketchbook, the one I used to fill with ideas before corporate life drained me dry. Inside were pages of notes about workplace wellness, empathy and leadership, human-centered business design. All the things Mark said didn't make money. I ran my fingers over the pages and whispered, "Maybe it's time they did." That was the moment, the seed, tiny, quiet, but real. In the weeks that followed, my apartment turned into a war room. I didn't have much left, just a severance check, a laptop, and the stubborn belief that emotions weren't a weakness. They were a market gap. I began researching every company that treated wellness like an accessory. Every leadership firm that preached resilience but practiced burnout. And I realized something shocking. Almost all of them were run by men who thought empathy was a liability. Mark wasn't an exception. He was a symptom, so I started building the cure. At first, it was just an idea, a small online platform offering emotional intelligence workshops and leadership therapy for burned-out executives. I called it Pulse, because if you have a pulse, you have feelings. And feelings, I decided, could be profitable. It sounded almost naive. But I didn't care. I wanted to build a business where emotions weren't punished. They were measured, understood, and valued. The first 3 months were brutal. No clients. No investors. Just rejection emails that all said some version of the same thing. It's a soft idea in a hard world. But I'd already been fired for being soft. What did I have left to lose? So I pushed harder. I cold called HR directors, emailed startups, pitched wellness seminars for free. I spent nights rewriting web copy, days walking into offices that didn't want me there, and slowly, painfully slowly, something started to shift. One morning, I got a call from a mid-sized tech firm. They'd read my article on empathy as an executive skill. Their CEO said, "We're drowning in turnover. Can you help us fix it?" I said yes. even though I had no clue how to run a full-scale corporate program yet. That week, I built one. I created emotional analytics reports, burnout mapping, empathy-based leadership scoring. When I presented it to their board, the room went silent. Then one of them said, "This could save us millions." They signed a 6-month contract on the spot. Pulse had its first client. From there, things moved fast. Every result led to another referral. CEOs who once mocked feelings started booking workshops under pseudonyms. HR leaders begged for metrics. Within a year, Pulse wasn't just surviving, it was booming. We'd built a measurable system for empathy, emotional intelligence quantified, branded, and sold. Investors started calling. I stopped answering. I wasn't ready to sell my soul again. Then one afternoon, Julia, my operations lead, burst into my office. "Claire, you need to see this." She turned her laptop around. There it was, a headline on Bloomberg Business Daily. Dovell and Crane reports, sharp decline in employee retention, mental health under scrutiny. My breath caught. That was Mark's company. The same one that fired me for being too emotional. Apparently, half their senior staff had quit. Anonymous reviews accuse leadership of toxic detachment and emotional negligence. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not with glee. Not with vengeance, just clarity. The company that punished me for feeling was collapsing because it never learned how. That night, I walked to my balcony and looked out at the city. The same skyline that once felt indifferent now shimmered differently. Not softer, just fairer. I whispered to myself, let's see who's too emotional now. I didn't know it then, but that was the first chapter of the quietest revenge I'd ever deliver. Because the next time I'd see Mark, I wouldn't be standing across his desk. I'd be sitting across the negotiation table. I still remember the exact sentence that ended my career. It was a Thursday. Gray skies, cold coffee, another morning of pretending everything was fine. I'd just finished leading a presentation that could have landed us a multi-million-dollar client. Everyone clapped. Everyone, except my boss, Mark. He sat there in his custom Italian suit, clicking his pen like he was waiting for me to make one last mistake. When the meeting ended, he gestured for me to stay behind. "Close the door, Claire." I did. He leaned back, sighed like a man burdened by other people's feelings, and said the words that would replay in my mind for months. "You're too emotional to lead. It makes clients uncomfortable." At first I laughed. I actually thought he was joking. But he wasn't. He slid a pink envelope across the table, neat, thin, final. "We're going in a different direction." Just like that. No warning. No gratitude. Just too emotional. It wasn't just about losing the job. It was about what it represented. I'd spent 7 years at Dovell and Crane. 7 years of late nights, silent weekends, half-eaten takeout in the office kitchen. I'd stayed when others left. I'd built relationships with clients Mark could barely remember the names of. But the day I cried, just once. During a tough meeting about layoffs, everything I'd done became invisible. He didn't fire me for poor performance. He fired me for being human. When I stepped outside, the sky had opened up, rain falling like punctuation marks. I didn't even run for cover. I just stood there, pink envelope in hand, watching the city move around me as if nothing had changed. That's the thing about losing something you gave your whole heart to. The world doesn't notice. It keeps spinning. Traffic keeps honking, people keep scrolling. But inside you, everything stops. That night, I sat on my couch with a blanket and an empty mug, staring at the walls. Every time I blinked, I saw Mark's face. Every time I tried to sleep, I heard his voice. Calm, condescending, rehearsed. "You're too emotional. Too emotional to be respected. Too emotional to be promoted. Too emotional to be trusted." He turned my strength into a flaw. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my old sketchbook, the one I used to fill with ideas before corporate life drained me dry. Inside were pages of notes about workplace wellness, empathy in leadership, human-centered business design. All the things Mark said didn't make money. I ran my fingers over the pages and whispered, maybe it's time they did. That was the moment, the seed. Tiny, quiet, but real. In the weeks that followed, my apartment turned into a war room. I didn't have much left. Just a severance check, a laptop, and the stubborn belief that emotions weren't a weakness. They were a market gap. I began researching every company that treated wellness like an accessory, every leadership firm that preached resilience but practiced burnout. And I realized something shocking. Almost all of them were run by men who thought empathy was a liability. Mark wasn't an exception. He was a symptom. So I started building the cure. At first, it was just an idea, a small online platform offering emotional intelligence workshops and leadership therapy for burned-out executives. I called it Pulse, because if you have a pulse, you have feelings. And feelings, I decided, could be profitable. It sounded almost naive. But I didn't care. I wanted to build a business where emotions weren't punished. They were measured, understood, and valued. The first 3 months were brutal. No clients, no investors. Just rejection emails that all said some version of the same thing. It's a soft idea in a hard world. But I'd already been fired for being soft. What did I have left to lose? So I pushed harder. I cold-called HR directors, emailed startups, pitched wellness seminars for free. I spent nights rewriting web copy, days walking into offices that didn't want me there. And slowly, painfully slowly, something started to shift. One morning, I got a call from a mid-sized tech firm. They'd read my article on empathy as an executive skill. Their CEO said, "We're drowning in turnover. Can you help us fix it?" I said yes, even though I had no clue how to run a full-scale corporate program yet. That week, I built one. I created emotional analytics reports, burnout mapping, empathy-based leadership scoring. When I presented it to their board, the room went silent. Then one of them said, "This could save us millions." They signed a 6-month contract on the spot. Pulse had its first client. From there, things moved fast. Every result led to another referral. CEOs who once mocked feelings started booking workshops under pseudonyms. HR leaders begged for metrics. Within a year, Pulse wasn't just surviving. It was booming. We'd built a measurable system for empathy, emotional intelligence quantified, branded, and sold. Investors started calling. I stopped answering. I wasn't ready to sell my soul again. Then one afternoon, Julia, my operations lead, burst into my office. "Claire, you need to see this." She turned her laptop around. There it was. A headline on Bloomberg Business Daily. Dovell and Crane reports sharp decline in employee retention, mental health under scrutiny. My breath caught. That was Mark's company. The same one that fired me for being too emotional. Apparently, half their senior staff had quit. Anonymous reviews accused leadership of toxic detachment and emotional negligence. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not with glee, not with vengeance, just clarity. The company that punished me for feeling was collapsing because it never learned how. That night, I walked to my balcony and looked out at the city. The same skyline that once felt indifferent now shimmered differently. Not softer, just fairer. I whispered to myself, "Let's see who's too emotional now." I didn't know it then, but that was the first chapter of the quietest revenge I'd ever deliver, because the next time I'd see Mark, I wouldn't be standing across his desk. I'd be sitting across the negotiation table. A month after I launched Pulse, I thought I'd finally started healing. My anger had cooled into focus. My humiliation into purpose, but healing is rarely linear. Sometimes just when you think you've moved on, the truth finds you, sharper than before. It happened one evening over coffee with an old colleague, Dana. We hadn't spoken since I left Dovell and Crane. She looked nervous, almost guilty, stirring her latte like she was afraid to meet my eyes. "Claire, I shouldn't even be telling you this," she began, "but you deserve to know. That sentence, "You deserve to know," has ruined more nights than I can count. She hesitated, then said it. Mark didn't just fire you. He made sure no one else would hire you. For a second, I didn't understand. Then she slid her phone across the table. It was an internal email, forwarded from someone in HR who still liked me. Subject line, recommendation for Claire Haynes, confidential response. My hands trembled as I read it. Claire is talented but emotionally unpredictable. She tends to overreact under pressure and struggles with leadership composure. I wouldn't recommend her for management roles at this time. Mark Crane, CEO, Dovell and Crane Consulting, emotionally unpredictable. Overreacts under pressure. I read the words again and again until they blurred. This wasn't feedback. It was character assassination, typed neatly, sent quietly, stamped with authority. And the worst part? He didn't even have to lie. He just twisted truth until it broke. Dana reached across the table. He sent that to everyone who called for a reference. He said it was off the record, but you know how this industry works. Once that kind of note circulates, it's over. I felt something inside me crack. Not rage, not yet, just disbelief. I'd spent years giving that man my best ideas, my weekends, my loyalty, and in return, he'd reduced me to a liability. Why are you telling me now? I asked. Because, she said softly, I saw your name on the Pulse website. You're doing something real. And she hesitated, glancing at her phone again. He's been mocking it. Mocking it? She nodded. He called it a therapy circle for failed managers. He even joked in a meeting that if your startup ever got big, he'd buy it just to shut you up. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in the dark, replaying his voice in my head, too emotional to lead. He'd used my emotions against me once. He'd used my silence ever since. But that silence ended that night. I started investigating, quietly, methodically, the way I used to prepare for corporate strategy audits. Every contact, every client, every whisper of my name in the professional circuit. And the deeper I dug, the more I found. He'd taken credit from my wellness analytics model, the framework that later became Pulse's foundation. He'd used my data to pitch emotional intelligence leadership as his innovation. Ironic, considering he once said empathy was career suicide. There were memos, presentations, even a white paper with my phrasing, word for word, except my name had been replaced by his. For weeks, I oscillated between fury and exhaustion. I wanted to confront him, to storm into his glass office and make him see what he'd done. But I also knew how that story ended. He'd call me emotional, again. So instead, I did what he'd never expect. I went quiet, and I started building something he couldn't take. Pulse grew faster after that. Our programs expanded from corporate workshops to emotional leadership consulting. We trained managers how to lead without cruelty, how to retain staff through trust instead of fear. Ironically, Mark's scandal-ridden company became my best marketing campaign. Every time his employees quit in waves, another business called us. By year 2, we had 40 employees, 4 offices, and a waitlist of Fortune 500 clients. Our name appeared in Forbes. Our tagline, "Empathy is the new edge," went viral on LinkedIn. I started getting calls from investors who once ignored me. And every time someone asked if I wanted to exit, I smiled and said, "Not yet. I'm still building the story." Then came the call that changed everything, a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years, dripping with forced politeness. "Claire, it's Mark Crane." I didn't answer at first. I just let him speak into the silence. "I wanted to congratulate you on Pulse. Impressive growth, really. Listen, we're exploring partnership opportunities in the emotional analytics space. Maybe there's room for collaboration?" Collaboration. That word almost made me laugh. He wanted to collaborate with the woman he blacklisted. He wanted to buy the emotions he once fired. I kept my voice even. "Sure, Mark, let's talk. Send me the proposal." He didn't realize I was recording the call. Over the next few months, he tried to weave his way back in. Subtle offers, coffee invites, strategic partnerships. I played along. Because revenge isn't about rage. It's about rhythm. I wanted him to believe I was flattered, maybe even tempted. I wanted him comfortable, blind to the storm building beneath his feet. Meanwhile, I met with a venture fund specializing in corporate acquisitions. They'd been tracking Pulse's growth and saw something I hadn't dared to imagine yet. You could buy out smaller consulting firms, including your old one. It's bleeding value, I laughed when they said it. Buy Dovell and Crane? You're joking, but they weren't. Their analysts showed me the numbers. Retention loss, declining revenue, toxic leadership ratings. Mark had run his empire on emotional debt, and now the interest was due. I signed the first acquisition agreement 6 months later. Not for Dovell and Crane yet, but for one of their key client partners. It was symbolic. The first domino. Every deal I made, every speech I gave, every article I published carried the same quiet pulse. I'm not coming back for revenge. I'm coming back for recognition. Still, late at night, I'd catch myself whispering his words. Too emotional. It didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded me of where I started. The rain, the pink envelope, the disbelief. He tried to turn my emotions into a weakness. But I'd turned them into equity, and one day soon, I'd own the company that once called me unstable. Not out of spite, but because no one should be punished for caring. Success has a strange sound. It doesn't arrive with applause or fanfare. Sometimes it's just your phone buzzing with new contracts, or your team cheering quietly in the next room. For me, it came one morning when I opened Business Insider and saw the headline, Pulse named Top 10 Emotional Intelligence Startups Transforming Corporate Culture. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to process it. The company I built from humiliation was now being recognized for humanizing business. There was no champagne pop, no party, just silence, and the memory of a pink envelope sliding across a table. In 2 years, Pulse had grown from a small wellness consultancy into a multi-million-dollar ecosystem. We weren't just training executives anymore, we were reshaping entire companies. We created EQ Metrics, a proprietary system that measured emotional engagement, burnout risk, and leadership empathy across teams. It sounded abstract at first, but the numbers didn't lie. Firms that implemented our program saw retention rise by 37%. Productivity jumped 22%. And for the first time in corporate history, empathy became a line item in board reports. The irony still made me smile. Mark once said, "Emotions don't belong in business." Now, businesses paid me 6 figures to teach them otherwise. But success didn't feel clean. It never does when it's born from pain. Every conference I spoke at, every CEO who shook my hand, a part of me still remembered that office. That closed door. That voice saying I was too emotional to lead. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. But I hadn't forgiven him either. Not yet. Forgiveness, I decided, was something earned, not owed. Then came the call that would change everything. Julia burst into my office again. Same energy as before, except this time she was smiling. "Claire, you need to see this." I braced myself. Last time it was bad news. This time it was poetic. She turned her laptop toward me. Another headline. Dovell and Crane lays off 40% of staff amid leadership crisis. Below it, a photo of Mark Crane, looking smaller than I remembered. The confident smirk replaced by tight frustration. The article described internal chaos, departing executives, unpaid bonuses, clients walking away. And then one sentence that almost made me laugh aloud. Industry experts suggest the firm's emotionally detached management style may have contributed to the collapse. Emotionally detached. His words turned against him. For a moment, I just sat there, silent. Then I said quietly, "Get me their financials." Julia blinked. Wait, are you saying— Yes, I said. I want to know what they're worth. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by my window, city lights flickering on the glass, running the numbers in my mind. Could Pulse really buy Dovell and Crane, the company that fired me, the name that once defined my failure? At first, the thought felt ridiculous, but then I remembered. I had been ridiculous once too, according to them, and yet here I was. Over the next weeks, I worked like someone possessed. I didn't tell my board the full story, just that we were exploring strategic expansion. They didn't need to know this was personal. We analyzed Dovell and Crane's portfolio: declining revenue, client attrition, lawsuits, executive turnover. They were bleeding slowly, too proud to admit it, too late to fix it. All I needed was leverage. And leverage, I had learned, doesn't come from force. It comes from patience. One Friday evening, I got an email from a mutual contact, an investor who used to work with Mark. He's looking to sell off part of the company, wants to save face before the press gets worse. Are you interested? I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I typed back 3 words. Let's discuss terms. It was surreal. The man who once told me my feelings were liabilities was now desperate to sell the very thing that defined him. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm, because the best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It's dignified. It's watching karma unfold, and knowing you didn't have to force it. The following week, I walked into the same building I'd once been escorted out of. Different suit, different energy, same smell of polished floors and corporate perfume. When the elevator doors opened, I saw the logo, Dovell and Crane Consulting. Silver letters, dull from neglect. I took a deep breath and walked to the front desk. Claire Haynes, here to see Mark Crane. The receptionist froze. Recognition flickered across her face. Of course, Ms. Haynes, she said quickly. He's expecting you. Mark's office hadn't changed much. Same glass walls, same skyline view, same overly staged masculinity. But he had. His hair was grayer, his suit looser, his smile tighter. Claire, he said, standing to shake my hand. It's been, 3 years? 2.5, I said calmly. Though it feels longer. He chuckled awkwardly. Time flies. I've been following your company. Pulse, right? Fantastic work. The market's buzzing about you. I smiled. Yes. We try to bring humanity back to leadership. That one word, humanity, landed like a quiet slap. He gestured for me to sit. I'm glad you came. I'll be honest, things have been challenging lately. The industry's shifting, clients are unpredictable, and I think your firm could help us adapt. Maybe even partner. He leaned forward. You have the emotional side. We have the legacy. Together, we'd be unstoppable. I let him finish. Then I slid a document across his desk. It wasn't a partnership proposal. It was a buyout offer for 100% of Dovell and Crane Consulting. His face froze. What is this? Terms, I said simply. For acquisition, full transfer. Pulse will retain your staff, your brand name, your assets. You'll receive a golden handshake and an advisory title. He blinked. You're serious? Completely. He stared at the papers, then at me. I don't understand. Why would you even want this company? I smiled softly. Because it taught me everything I needed to build mine. The silence between us stretched long and fragile. He finally said, You're really not the emotional girl I remember. No, I said quietly. I still am. I just learned how to use it. He didn't know what to say, and honestly, I didn't need him to. I stood, gathered my things, and added, "I'll give you a week to decide. After that, the offer drops." Then I walked out. Same hallway, same click of heels, completely different woman. That night, standing on my balcony, I watched the city lights again, this time with a glass of wine and a calm I couldn't explain. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. Everything he once used to break me, my empathy, my intuition, my emotion, had built an empire that now hovered over his. And as I watched the lights flicker in the distance, I whispered the same words that started it all. Let's see who's too emotional now. The morning after the meeting, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Investors, advisors, journalists. Everyone wanted to know if the rumors were true, that Pulse was negotiating a buyout of Dovell and Crane. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I just smiled and said, "We're exploring opportunities for emotional restructuring." They laughed at the phrasing. But I wasn't joking. For years, men like Mark Crane had built empires on emotional neglect, calling it efficiency, professionalism, logic. Now I was about to show the world what happens when empathy becomes the sharper business model. Mark took 3 days to respond. His assistant emailed my lawyer. "Mr. Crane would like to discuss revisions to the offer." I expected that. He'd never been the type to surrender gracefully. When the follow-up meeting was scheduled, I wore the same color suit I'd worn the day he fired me, charcoal gray. Not as a statement, but as symmetry. The boardroom was smaller than I remembered. The glass looked less like power and more like fragility now. Mark sat across from me, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. Beside him sat his CFO, a woman named Ellen, who I remembered vaguely from old meetings. She looked at me, then at the document in front of her, and smiled. "I've reviewed the numbers. Your offer's fair. More than fair, actually." Mark shot her a look, but she didn't flinch. For the first time, I realized he was no longer the center of this company. He was its shadow. We spent 3 hours going over terms. When it was over, Mark leaned back and said, "You know, Claire, I never imagined it'd come to this." I met his eyes calmly. Neither did I. But here we are. He exhaled through his nose like a man trying to maintain dignity. "I'll sign. But under one condition, keep the name. Dovell and Crane still has value." I tilted my head. "Maybe, but names should represent what they stand for. Don't you think?" He looked confused. "What do you mean?" I smiled. "When Pulse completes the acquisition, we'll rebrand." He frowned. "To what?" "Crane Pulse." He blinked. "You're keeping my name?" "Yes," I said softly. "As a reminder, for both of us." He didn't understand, and not fully like that I wasn't honoring him. I was transforming the narrative. The same way pain turns to purpose, I was turning his name into the foundation of what he tried to destroy. The deal was finalized 2 weeks later. The paperwork signed, the press release drafted, the lawyers paid. On the morning of the announcement, my inbox overflowed. Old colleagues from Dovell and Crane, clients I hadn't spoken to in years. Even Dana, the friend who showed me that first email. Her message was short. "You did it. He'll have to read your name on every paycheck." I smiled at the screen, tears threatening but never falling. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. The news spread like wildfire. Business Daily called it the most ironic merger of the decade. Forbes ran a headline that made me laugh out loud. "Fired for feeling, now she owns the firm that fired her." Even my mother, who still didn't fully understand what I did for a living, sent a text. "You've always cared too much, honey." Guess that finally paid off. For the first time in my life, caring was currency. In the following months, I visited the offices I now technically owned. It was strange, and walking through those same halls, now with people standing to greet me. The fear that used to grip me at the sound of my name had been replaced by something quieter, steadier respect. I met with employees, not as their conqueror, but as their new leader. I told them, We're not here to erase what came before. We're here to evolve it. They didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They just nodded, visibly relieved to finally have someone who listened. The first major change I made was small, symbolic, but powerful. I replaced the Employee of the Month board with a new one titled Heartbeat of the Month. It recognized acts of empathy, not just performance metrics, not just numbers. I wanted everyone who worked here to know that emotional intelligence wasn't weakness. It was our advantage. Within 6 months, the retention rate improved by 43%. Clients who'd left came back. The building started to feel alive again. As for Mark, he took his advisory title quietly. He still showed up sometimes, older, humbled, trying to remain relevant. One afternoon, I caught him lingering by the new logo on the wall, Crane Pulse. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned to me and said softly, "You really did it, didn't you?" "I did," I said. "But not to beat you. To prove you wrong," he nodded slowly. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You were never too emotional, Claire." I was just too afraid of what emotion could do. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Because in that single sentence, he admitted what power really meant. Not control, not dominance, but connection. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just said, "Thank you." And for the first time in years, I meant it. The company grew faster after that. Investors flooded in, not just for our product, but for our philosophy. Empathy as a system became a national movement. We trained leaders in over 20 countries. One night, standing on stage at a leadership summit in New York, I looked out over hundreds of faces, CEOs, founders, policymakers, all listening as I told the story of how emotion built an empire. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. I just said, once upon a time, someone told me feelings had no place in business. I believed him, until I realized that business without feeling isn't business. It's machinery. And machinery breaks, the audience stood. Not an applause for me, but for the truth. Later that night, as the event lights dimmed and my driver pulled up, I took a quiet moment by the window, watching the city blur. This was my life now. Calm. Deliberate, earned. The world didn't change overnight. But I did. And that I realized was enough. Because revenge isn't about making someone else lose. It's about reclaiming what they tried to take from you. Your voice, your worth, your heart. And as I stared at the skyline, I whispered one last time, "Too emotional?" "No, just human." The invitation landed in my inbox on a Sunday night. Subject line: The Future of Corporate Leadership, Keynote Gala. At the bottom of the list of speakers, one name caught my breath. Mark Crane, founder Crane Pulse Advisory, of course. He was still trying to carve meaning out of the ruins. I read the event description twice. A high-profile leadership conference in Chicago, televised live. Topic: Balancing empathy and efficiency in modern business. It felt scripted by fate. Because 3 days earlier, the board had asked me to accept their keynote slot. Directly after his, I said yes without hesitation. The night of the gala, the ballroom shimmered with glass and light. Hundreds of executives, journalists, and investors filled the seats, their badges flashing under chandeliers. My name tag read Claire Andrews, CEO, Crane Pulse. Every syllable of that title carried history. Every letter hummed with memory. Backstage, I could hear Mark's voice. Practiced, charming, the same tone he used to use when he sold ideas that weren't his. "Leadership isn't about feelings," he told the crowd, his words echoing through the curtains. "It's about results. You can't let emotions cloud your judgment." A ripple of polite applause followed. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, and smiled. He was still giving the same speech that once broke me. But tonight, I was the one with the microphone after him. When they called my name, the room dimmed. Music swelled softly as I stepped onto the stage. Mark passed me at the podium, Our eyes met just long enough for me to see a flicker of unease behind his smile. He didn't expect me to look calm. He expected victory to taste like anger. Instead, I looked at peace. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady through the mic. "It's an honor to follow the man who first told me feelings didn't belong in business." The audience chuckled, unsure if it was a joke. Mark stiffened in the front row. I continued. "I used to believe that too. I thought leadership meant armor, that the less you felt, the more you achieved. Until the armor cracked, and I realized that what leaks out of those cracks is the part that connects us." Silence spread, not the awkward kind, but the listening kind. I clicked the remote. Behind me, the screen lit up with 2 words in white: emotional ROI. People leaned forward. "Return on emotion," I said. "It's measurable now. Retention, innovation, loyalty, these aren't side effects, they're the foundation." Graphs appeared, data from Crane Pulse's transformation. Each number glowed like a quiet confession of success. We used to think emotion made us weak. But it turns out when people feel seen, they work stronger, stay longer, and dream bigger. A pause. Then I added softly, "That's what happens when you stop managing fear and start leading hearts." A murmur ran through the audience. Reporters started typing. I could see Mark's jaw tighten. Halfway through the talk, I invited Ellen, now Chief Operations Officer, to join me on stage. She'd once sat beside Mark, silent and overlooked. Now she spoke clearly into the mic. For years, I watched empathy get dismissed as inefficiency. Today, it's our competitive edge, applause thundered. Mark looked down, fingers pressed against his knee. It wasn't cruelty that satisfied me. It was clarity. He was watching a truth unfold that no longer included his control. When the lights dimmed again for Q&A, a journalist stood. "Claire, one question. How does it feel to lead the company that once fired you?" I glanced at Mark before answering. He sat very still, the stage lights carving silver across his hair. "It feels," I said slowly, "like coming full circle. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right." Laughter and applause broke out. But my eyes stayed on Mark. For the first time, he didn't look defensive. He looked small, human. After the session, the crowd surged forward, shaking hands, taking photos, congratulating me. Mark lingered near the exit, watching. When the noise faded, he approached quietly. His tie hung loose, and his voice, when it came, was softer than I remembered. "I didn't expect to see you again like this." "Neither did I said. He hesitated, searching for words. "You spoke beautifully. You've built something remarkable," I nodded. "Thank you," he looked down. "Back then, I really thought I was helping you toughen up. By breaking me?" He winced. "By teaching you not to care so much. I didn't realize that caring was your power." For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "We all teach the lessons we need most, don't we?" He looked up, eyes tired but honest. "You turned out to be a better leader than I ever was." And that was the moment the revenge melted into release. Because hearing him say that, not out of defeat, but recognition, was worth more than any victory headline. Later that night, after the cameras packed up and the ballroom emptied, I stood alone on the stage. The screen still glowed faintly behind me. Crane Pulse. Leadership with heart. I touched the edge of the podium, the same one he'd once ruled from, and whispered to the empty room, "You called me too emotional." But emotion built this. The chandeliers reflected my smile in 100 fragments of light. As I walked out to the quiet Chicago night, snow began to fall, thin, steady flakes that caught the street lamps like confetti. My driver opened the door, but I paused to breathe in the cold air. The city smelled of metal and promise. The kind of night that makes you believe in new beginnings. In the glass door's reflection, I saw my own face. Calm, centered, unarmored. And for a second, I saw the woman I'd been on the day I was fired, mascara streaked, shaking, convinced the world had no place for softness. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her, one day they'll call you emotional again, but this time, they'll mean it as a compliment. That night, back in my hotel room, I placed my phone on the table and turned off all the lights. For the first time in years, I didn't need to prove anything. The story had already rewritten itself. Revenge wasn't the goal. Redemption was. And sometimes they look the same. Until you realize one ends in silence and the other ends in peace. It's strange how silence changes meaning over time. Once it was punishment. Now it feels like peace. A year has passed since the gala. The company has doubled in valuation. We're not just a business anymore. We're a movement. Every week, I get emails from leaders around the world, CEOs, teachers, hospital administrators, even parents. All writing the same thing in different words. We stopped apologizing for caring. That sentence always makes me smile. Because that's where this all began. One person apologizing for caring too much. I still work from the same office downtown. Big windows, white walls, no corner desk. I like to sit among my team, not above them. We start every Monday with something I call the heart check. Everyone shares one word for how they're feeling. No agenda, no strategy, just honesty. It's a small ritual, but it changes everything. People look forward to Mondays now. Last week, one of the new interns said, "I used to hide my anxiety in my old job. Here, it feels like part of the conversation." And I realized this was the empire I'd dreamed of building, one that didn't need fear to function. I haven't seen Mark in months. He still sits on a few boards, gives guest lectures, writes the occasional article. He's quiet now, less performative, more human. One afternoon, I got an email from him. Subject line? No business, just gratitude. He wrote, "I watched your recent interview. You spoke about emotion as strength. You were right all along. I hope you'll let me learn from you one day." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "We're all still learning, Mark. You taught me something too, but that suppression isn't strength. It's fear in disguise." He replied only one line. "Then maybe I'm ready to feel again." And I believed him. The following month, Pulse hosted its first annual Leadership with Heart Summit. Thousands attended. Executives, students, therapists, social workers, all gathered under the same idea. That emotional intelligence isn't soft. It's structural. The opening ceremony took place in the same Chicago hotel where he once told me to toughen up. I stood on stage again, but this time the air was different. There was no tension, no revenge burning beneath my ribs, just warmth. "A year ago," I said to the audience, "I thought I'd finished my story. But I've realized something. Healing isn't a final chapter. It's a practice. Every day you choose who you want to be, the version that reacts, or the version that rebuilds." The crowd was quiet, that rare kind of silence that feels sacred. Then I added softly, "The girl who once cried in a bathroom after being called too emotional, she didn't disappear. She became my compass." Applause rose like a wave. It wasn't for success. It was for survival. After the summit, I walked through the old corridors alone. The ballroom lights were off. Only the exit signs glowed red against the dark. It hit me. How far I'd come, not by outsmarting anyone, but by outfeeling them. By refusing to shut down the part of me that hurt. That night, I took out my journal, the same one I'd written in the day I was fired. The first page still read, "Maybe feeling too much will ruin me." I flipped to the last page and wrote, "Feeling too much saved me." Then I closed the book for good. Weeks later, during a quiet Friday morning at the office, Ellen walked in with a smile. "Guess what?" she said. "Harvard called. They want to feature Pulse in their leadership curriculum." I laughed. Not out of pride, but disbelief. It felt poetic. The institution that once taught men like Mark how to remove emotion from leadership was now calling us to teach the opposite. When she left, I stood by the window, looking down at the city that once terrified me. The skyline shimmered, alive, pulsing like a heartbeat. In the evenings, I've started mentoring young women, especially the ones who've been told they're too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too invested. I tell them what I wish someone had told me years ago. Your softness isn't your weakness. It's your intelligence showing in a different language. They listen the way I once did, with disbelief turning slowly into hope, because that's the secret about empathy. Once you let it in, it multiplies. And the world, despite its noise, still runs on the quiet things. Last month, a documentary filmmaker approached me about turning my story into a feature. She asked if I'd be comfortable having the firing scene reenacted. I thought for a long moment, then said, "Only if we keep the silence after it. The part where I just sit there breathing. Because that's when everything began." She smiled. "You mean the part where you lost everything?" "No," I said. "The part where I found my voice." One evening not long after, I was walking out of the office when I saw Mark waiting by the elevator. He looked older, smaller somehow, but softer around the edges. He nodded respectfully. "Claire, I came to drop off some papers. Thought you might be gone by now." "I stay late sometimes," I said. "Old habits," he smiled faintly. "I've been consulting for a nonprofit. They're teaching emotional literacy in schools now, I think." "You'd be proud," I was. When the elevator arrived, he stepped in, then paused. "You changed the industry, you know. You made it human again." The doors closed. And that, I realized, was the full circle moment. Not victory, validation. That weekend, I drove to the coast. No meetings, no calls. Just me, the sea, and the quiet I used to fear. I sat on the rocks as the sun set, pink and gold melting into the water, and thought about every label I'd ever been given. Emotional, sensitive, naive, and how one by one, I'd turn them into strengths. Maybe that's what revenge really is. The art of turning what they mocked into what moves you forward. As the waves crashed, I whispered the final truth aloud, letting it dissolve into the wind. They called me too emotional. But emotion built my empire, and in the end, it bought theirs. Then I smiled, not with triumph, but with peace. Because it was never about winning. It was about feeling fully, fearlessly, and finally free.